The unseen distress call. Jake Reynolds sat in the pilot's seat of his worn-out ship, the Wanderer. The soft hum of the engines was the only sound as he drifted near Europa, one of Jupiter's many moons. Scavenging old wrecks was his life now. No crew, no home, just him and the cold silence of space. His fingers tapped on the console as he scanned the area. Suddenly, a faint signal flickered on his screen. A distress call. Strange, Jake muttered to himself. No ships should be out here. The signal was weak, almost fading. His curiosity got the better of him. Jake adjusted his course and followed the signal through the dark void. After a few minutes, he saw it, a massive alien ship, broken and floating aimlessly. It wasn't human. Its sleek black surface shimmered like liquid, even in the dim light. Jake's heart pounded. Alien wrecks were dangerous, but they also meant valuable tech. He needed the money. Taking a deep breath, he docked his ship and suited up. "All right, Jake, in and out," he whispered, stepping through the airlock. Inside, the ship was eerily silent. The walls pulsed faintly, as if the ship itself was alive. Jake moved carefully, scanning for valuable tech. But something felt off. Then he heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound, like a heartbeat. What the hell? Jake followed the sound down a dark corridor. He stopped in front of a room. The door was slightly open. Pushing it gently, Jake stepped inside and froze. In the center of the room was a large containment pod, glowing faintly. Inside it was a girl. No, an alien, floating peacefully. Her violet skin shimmered under the light. Long silver hair floated around her face, and her delicate features made her look almost human. She looked young, beautiful, and fragile. Jake's eyes widened. A prisoner. Suddenly, his wrist device beeped. An alert. Warning. Unknown ship approaching fast. Crap, Jake muttered. He had no time. But leaving her here. Something in his gut told him that was wrong. He moved quickly, scanning the pod's controls. There were alien symbols he couldn't read, but one symbol flashed red, almost like a warning. Jake hesitated. Then he pressed the release button. The pod hissed, and the girl's eyes snapped open. Glowing violet eyes locked onto Jake's brown ones. She gasped for air and stumbled out, falling into his arms. "Hey, easy," Jake whispered, steadying her. Her voice was soft, unfamiliar, but he understood her somehow. "Why? Why did you free me?" Jake looked at the screen. The enemy ship was minutes away. No time to explain. "We need to go. Now." She nodded weakly, trusting him for reasons she didn't understand. Jake helped her back to the Wanderer and launched the ship just as the enemy vessel appeared on his radar. "They're locking weapons on us," Jake muttered, pushing the ship to its limits. The alien girl, still weak, placed a hand on the console. The ship's systems flickered. "I can help," she whispered. Jake didn't ask how. He just nodded. With her help, they jumped into hyperspace just before the enemy could fire. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake sighed in relief, leaning back in his seat. That was close. He turned to the alien girl. She sat quietly, her violet eyes scanning the ship. Jake noticed the fear hidden behind them. "So, who are you?" he asked softly. She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Alara." Jake nodded. "I'm Jake. Mind telling me why those guys wanted you so bad?" Alara hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet. But you shouldn't have saved me." Jake frowned. "Why not? Looked like you needed help." She stood, her expression serious now. "You don't understand. By saving me, you've put yourself in danger." Jake chuckled dryly. "Lady, Danger is my middle name." But Alara didn't smile. "They will hunt you now. They won't stop until they find me." Jake's smile faded. This was serious. "Who are they?" Alara's voice was barely audible. "My people." Jake blinked. Wait, your own people want you dead. She nodded slowly. And now, they'll come for you too. Jake leaned back, running a hand through his messy hair. Great, just my luck. Alara sat down, looking at the stars through the window. Jake watched her for a moment, curiosity burning inside him. Why would your own people want to hurt you? He finally asked. Alara's eyes softened. Because I am more valuable to them as a prisoner than as a princess. Jake's eyes widened. Princess. Before he could ask more, a beep from the console interrupted them. An incoming message flashed across the screen. To the human ship, surrender the princess, or be destroyed. Jake and Alara exchanged glances. Jake grinned, shaking his head. Well, guess we're in this together now. Alara's lips curved into a faint smile. It seems so. Jake powered up the ship's weapons. Let's give them hell. As the stars stretched before them, Jake couldn't help but wonder, what the hell have I gotten myself into? But deep down, he knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. The princess's secret. Jake sat silently in the pilot's seat, his eyes fixed on the blinking warning light on the console. The message still flickered across the screen. Surrender the princess, or be destroyed. He let out a frustrated sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. Great, just great. Alara sat across from him, her violet eyes distant as she stared at the stars outside. The glow of hyperspace painted her face in soft hues of blue and purple. She looked calm, but Jake could sense the storm brewing inside her. He finally broke the silence. Princess. Alara flinched slightly at the word, but didn't turn to face him. I didn't ask for this, she whispered. Jake chuckled softly. Yeah. Well, I didn't ask to be hunted across the galaxy either, but here we are. She finally looked at him, her expression softer now. I didn't mean to drag you into this. Jake leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. So, why are your own people trying to lock you up? Aren't princesses supposed to be, you know, loved or something? Alara's lips curled into a sad smile. Love doesn't mean much when power is at stake. Jake frowned, waiting for her to continue. She hesitated, then took a deep breath. My father is the emperor of the Zyran Empire, she began. For centuries, our people have ruled with strength, but strength comes at a cost. Jake's brows furrowed. What cost? Alara's voice dropped to a whisper. Control. My father believes that to maintain power, we must control the weaker species, enslave them if necessary. Jake's jaw clenched. Sounds familiar, he muttered, thinking of humanity's own dark history. She nodded. I never agreed with him. I believe in freedom, in peace, but to my father, that makes me a threat. Jake's mind raced. An alien princess fighting against her own empire. This was bigger than he thought. So, what? Your dad wants to lock you up because you disagree with him? Jake asked, trying to piece it all together. It's not just that, Alara said softly. She held out her hand, and a faint, glowing energy swirled around her fingers. I have abilities. Powers that can enhance our technology, control minds, even destroy fleets. Jake's eyes widened. Well, that's terrifying. Alara nodded. My father wants to use me as a weapon. I refused. So he ordered my capture. I barely escaped. Jake leaned back, processing everything. So now they're after you because you are the key to their power. Alara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Yes, and now they're after you because you saved me. Jake sighed deeply, a mixture of regret and determination in his eyes. Yeah, well, I couldn't just leave you there. She looked at him with gratitude. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Jake muttered. We're not out of this mess. Suddenly, the ship's alarm blared. Jake jumped to the console. What now? He scanned the system and froze. No way. They found us. Alara stood up, panic in her eyes. That's impossible. We're in hyperspace. Jake's fingers flew over the controls. Well, tell that to them. They're locking onto our signal. Alara placed her hand on the console again, her energy flowing through the ship. I can block them, but not for long. Jake gritted his teeth. We need to find a safe place to hide. Alara nodded. There's a planet nearby. Nixura. It's dangerous, but it'll hide us. Dangerous how? Jake asked, already adjusting their course. Alara gave him a grim look. Let's just say we'll wish the Empire was the only thing hunting us. Jake groaned. Perfect. The ship shuddered as they exited hyperspace, landing on the dark, desolate surface of Nixura. Jagged rocks and endless shadows stretched before them. Stay close, Jake whispered, grabbing his blaster. Alara followed silently, her glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. Suddenly, a guttural growl echoed around them. Jake froze. What the hell was that? Alara whispered. The Nixer beasts. They hunt anything, and never stop until they catch their prey. Jake muttered under his breath. Great, just great. As they moved through the rocky terrain, Jake couldn't help but ask, So, what's the plan, Princess? We can't hide forever. Alara stopped, turning to him with determination. We find allies. There are those who resist the Empire. If we can reach them, we stand a chance. Jake raised an eyebrow. And how do we find them? Alara's eyes glowed brighter. They'll find us. Before Jake could question her, a loud roar echoed through the darkness. Closer this time. Jake gripped his blaster tighter. Let's hope they find us fast. Alara nodded, her voice steady. We'll survive. Together. As the shadows closed in, Jake knew one thing for sure. This was far from over. Hunted across the stars. The cold wind of Nixara howled through the jagged rocks, cutting through the silence like a blade. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the dark, unfamiliar terrain. Every shadow felt like a threat, every sound like a predator waiting to strike. Alara stood beside him, her glowing violet eyes steady but distant. Her shimmering silver hair fluttered in the icy breeze. She wasn't afraid. At least, she didn't show it. Jake whispered, You said something about beasts, the ones that never stop hunting. Alara nodded, her voice soft but clear. Nixer beasts. They are drawn to movement, sound, even fear. We need to keep moving. Jake chuckled nervously. No pressure then. Suddenly, a low growl rumbled through the air. Jake froze. The sound came from behind them. Slowly, he turned his head. His breath caught in his throat. A creature, twice his size, crouched on a rock. Its black, leathery skin glistened under the faint light. Glowing red eyes locked onto Jake and Alara. Razor-sharp teeth gleamed in its wide mouth, saliva dripping from its fangs. Its claws dug into the stone, ready to pounce. Move, Alara shouted. Jake didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed her hand, and they sprinted through the narrow canyon. The beast let out a deafening roar and lunged after them. Jake's boots pounded against the rocky ground as he zigzagged through the terrain. Any brilliant ideas, Princess? He shouted. Alara's eyes glowed brighter. I can slow it down, but not for long. Then do it, Jake yelled, pulling her behind a boulder. Alara closed her eyes, focusing. A faint purple energy swirled around her hands. She raised them toward the beast, which was charging straight at them. Suddenly, the ground beneath the creature glowed and cracked. Alara's energy formed a barrier, trapping the beast for a moment. It roared in frustration, slashing at the invisible force holding it back. Jake panted, trying to catch his breath. Nice trick. Now what? Alara's voice trembled. We need to find shelter before it breaks free. They ran deeper into the canyon, the beast's roars fading behind them. But Jake knew it wouldn't be long before it caught up. After what felt like hours, they found a small cave hidden behind a waterfall of black liquid. Jake hesitated, but Alara pulled him inside. The liquid didn't touch them. It shimmered like a hologram, hiding the entrance perfectly. Inside, Jake collapsed against the cave wall. Okay, this is officially the worst day of my life. Alara sat beside him, her breathing steadied despite the chaos. You saved me. Twice now. Jake smirked. Yeah, well, I have a bad habit of doing stupid things. She smiled softly, the tension in her shoulders easing. For a moment, the danger outside felt distant. Jake broke the silence. So, this whole princess on the run thing. What's the plan? Alara's smile faded. We need allies. There's a rebellion forming. Species who refuse to bow to the Empire. I was trying to reach them before I was captured. Jake's eyes narrowed. And you think they'll help us? She nodded. If we survive long enough to find them. Jake sighed, rubbing his face. And where exactly are these rebels? Alara hesitated. They're scattered. But I know of one place, a hidden outpost on the desert moon of Vornis. Jake chuckled dryly. Of course it's on a desert moon. Why wouldn't it be? Alara's lips curved into a faint smile. You humans always find humor in danger. Jake grinned. It's kind of our thing. Before Alara could respond, a loud roar echoed outside the cave. Jake's grin vanished. Looks like our friend is back, he muttered. Alara's eyes glowed as she stood. We need to leave. Jake grabbed his blaster. I'm starting to miss my boring scavenger life. As they stepped out of the cave, Jake spotted the beast sniffing the air, searching for them. Alara whispered, If we reach higher ground, I can send a signal to the rebels. Jake nodded. Then let's climb. They moved quickly, scaling the rocky cliffs as the beast roared below. Jake's muscles ached, but adrenaline kept him going. Halfway up, the beast spotted them and charged. Jake fired his blaster, but the shots barely slowed it down. Alara, Jake shouted. Any time now. At the top, Alara raised her hands, sending a pulse of energy into the sky. A faint signal rippled through space. Jake aimed at a weak spot in the cliff, blasting it. Rocks tumbled down, blocking the beast's path just in time. Panting, Jake turned to Alara. Did it work? She nodded. They'll find us. We just need to survive until then. Jake sighed, sitting down. No pressure. Alara sat beside him, the glow in her eyes dimming. Thank you, Jake. He chuckled softly. Yeah, well, someone's got to keep you alive, princess. Alara smiled, but a shadow of worry lingered in her eyes. The hunt wasn't over, not yet. Trust forged in fire. The cold wind whipped against Jake's face as he stared at the endless rocky cliffs stretching out before him. Nixara's harsh landscape felt unforgiving, like it wanted to swallow him whole. Beside him, Alara stood silently, her violet eyes scanning the horizon. The faint glow from her irises was the only light in the growing darkness. Do you really think your rebel friends will come? Jake asked, breaking the heavy silence. Alara's voice was soft but steady. They will, if the signal reached them. Jake let out a dry chuckle. If. That's the part I don't like. She turned to him, her gaze calm. Doubt is human. But trust is what keeps us alive. Jake sighed, rubbing his temples. Yeah, well, trust doesn't stop a giant monster from eating us alive. Alara smiled faintly. No, but it gives us hope. Jake shook his head. You're way too calm for someone being hunted by an alien empire. And whatever that beast is. Her smile faded. I've been hunted my whole life, Jake. Calm is all I have left. Jake's chest tightened at her words, but before he could respond, a deep growl echoed from below. His body tensed instantly. Looks like our friend is still here, he muttered. Alara nodded. It won't stop. Not until we're dead. Jake gripped his blaster tighter. Then let's make sure that doesn't happen. They moved carefully along the narrow cliff, every step calculated. Jake's muscles ached from the endless running and climbing, but he pushed forward. Giving up wasn't an option. Not anymore. As they rounded a sharp corner, Jake stopped abruptly. His eyes widened. A dead end. Alara stepped beside him, her expression grim. "We're trapped." Jake groaned. "Perfect. Just perfect." The growl behind them grew louder, closer. Jake spun around, aiming his blaster down the path. Then, out of the shadows, the beast appeared. Its glowing red eyes locked onto them, its claws scraping against the rocks, sparks flying. Jake whispered, "Alara, any powers left in you?" She shook her head. "I'm too weak. I need time to recover." "Time is the one thing we don't have." Jake snapped. The beast lunged. Jake fired. Bright blue blasts shot from his weapon, hitting the creature's thick skin, but barely slowing it down. "Run," Jake shouted, pulling Alara behind him. "But there's nowhere to go," she protested. Jake glanced at the edge of the cliff, a long drop into darkness. His mind raced. "We jump." Alara's eyes widened. "Are you insane?" "Probably," Jake muttered. "But we're out of options." The beast roared, charging at full speed. Jake grabbed Alara's hand. "Hold your breath," he said, forcing a grin. Before she could protest, he pulled her with him, and they leaped off the cliff. The wind howled past them as they plummeted into the darkness. Jake's heart pounded in his ears. He tightened his grip on Alara, silently praying they wouldn't hit something sharp on the way down. Then, splash! They hit the freezing water below. The shock stole Jake's breath. He fought against the icy current, pulling Alara up to the surface. She gasped for air, clinging to him as the dark water pulled them along. They drifted through a narrow underground river, the walls of the cave glowing faintly with bioluminescent moss. Finally, they washed up on a rocky shore deep inside the cave. Jake coughed, rolling onto his back, exhausted. Alara sat beside him, shivering. "You really are insane," she whispered. Jake chuckled weakly. "Yeah, but we're alive." She nodded, hugging her knees. "For now." Jake sat up, shaking the water from his hair. "So, Princess, what's your story?" Alara raised an eyebrow. "You already know my story." "No," Jake said softly. "I know why your people are after you." "I don't know you." Alara's expression softened. She hesitated, then whispered, "I was never supposed to be born." Jake blinked. "What?" "My mother was a servant," she explained. "My father, the Emperor, never wanted me. But when they discovered my powers, everything changed." Jake's chest ached at her words. "So they kept you around because you were useful." She nodded. "I never had friends. Never had freedom. My powers were both my gift and my curse." Jake sighed. "Yeah, I know a thing or two about being alone." Alara looked at him, curiosity in her eyes. "Your family?" Jake's voice dropped. "Gone. Lost them in a war when I was a kid. After that, it was just me." Alara placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry." Jake gave a small smile. "It's okay. We're both kind of messed up." She chuckled softly. "Yes, but maybe that's why we understand each other." Suddenly, a faint peep echoed in the cave. Jake jumped up, grabbing his blaster. Alara held up a hand. "Wait, it's a signal." Jake frowned. "From who?" Alara's eyes sparkled with hope. "The rebels." Jake raised an eyebrow. "So, help's coming." Alara nodded. "Yes, but we need to survive until then." Jake grinned. "Then let's give them something to remember." Alara smiled, standing beside him. "Together." Jake nodded. "Together." Outside the cave, the beast roared once more, and in the distant sky, ships approached. The final battle was near. The betrayal within. The soft dripping of water echoed through the dark cave as Jake paced back and forth, his mind racing. Alara sat quietly, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The rebels' signal had been faint but clear. They were coming. But would they arrive in time? Jake stopped, rubbing his temples. Okay, let's think this through. We have an angry alien empire hunting us, a giant monster outside waiting to eat us, and now we're sitting ducks in a cave. Great plan, Jake. Really brilliant. Alara chuckled softly. Sometimes the simplest plans are the most effective. Jake gave her a half smile. Yeah, well, simple doesn't feel very safe right now. Alara's expression grew serious. I trust them. The rebels. They won't leave us behind. Jake sighed. I hope you're right, Princess. Suddenly, a soft beep from Jake's wrist communicator startled him. He frowned and checked the screen. A private message flickered across the display. His eyes widened in shock. Jake, it's me, Orion. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Orion. An old friend, once like a brother to him. They had survived countless battles together before going their separate ways. But why was he reaching out now? I know where you are. I can help you escape. Meet me outside the cave. Jake hesitated. Something felt off. He glanced at Alara, who watched him curiously. Everything okay? She asked softly. Jake forced a smile. Yeah, just an old friend. Says he can help us. Alara frowned. Help us? How does he know we're here? Jake shrugged, trying to hide his unease. He's got his ways. Alara stood, her eyes narrowing. Jake, be careful. Trust is dangerous in times like these. Jake nodded. I know, but if there's a chance he can get us out of here, I have to take it. Alara hesitated, then whispered, I'll wait here. But don't go alone. Jake grinned. Don't worry, Princess. I'll be fine. He stepped out of the cave, blaster in hand, heart pounding. The darkness felt thicker outside, every shadow a potential threat. Then he saw him, a tall figure leaning casually against a rock. Orion, Jake called out softly. The man turned, his face illuminated by the faint glow of a holoscreen. Orion's sharp blue eyes and rugged features were unmistakable. Jake, Orion greeted with a grin. Been a long time. Jake approached cautiously. Yeah, it has. What are you doing here? Orion's smile faded. I'm with the Empire now. Jake. Jake's blood ran cold. His grip on his blaster tightened. You're what? Orion raised his hands in mock surrender. Relax. I'm not here to kill you. Jake's eyes narrowed. Then why are you here? Orion's voice softened. To offer you a deal. Hand over the princess, and you're free. No more running. No more danger. Jake's mind spun. You're serious. Orion nodded. Dead serious. Jake's hands trembled. She trusts me. Orion sighed. Jake, she's not our problem. She's the Empire's problem. Why risk your life for her? Jake's voice cracked. Because she's more than what they say she is. Orion stepped closer. I'm giving you a choice, Jake, us, or her. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. Memories of battles fought side by side with Orion flashed through his mind. But then he thought of Alara, her pain, her hope, her trust in him. Jake's voice was barely a whisper. I can't betray her. Orion's eyes hardened. Then you've made your choice. Before Jake could react, Orion raised his weapon. But Jake was faster. He dove behind a rock as a blast shot past him. Damn it, Orion, Jake shouted, firing back. A fierce firefight erupted, echoing through the canyon. Inside the cave, Alara's eyes snapped open. She ran outside, her heart racing. She saw Jake pinned down, Orion advancing. Without thinking, she raised her hands, energy swirling around her. A powerful blast shot from her palms, knocking Orion back. Jake gasped for air, looking at Alara in shock. I told you to stay inside. Alara's eyes blazed. I'm not leaving you." Orion staggered to his feet, glaring at them. "This isn't over." He pressed a button on his wrist, and a small ship appeared overhead, pulling him up. Jake watched him go, breathing heavily. "We're screwed." Alara placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll find a way." Jake looked at her, determination in his eyes. Together. In the distance, the roar of the Nixer beast echoed once more. The fight was far from over. The final stand. Jake's breath was shallow, his chest heaving from the intense firefight with Orion. The weight of betrayal still hung heavy in the air. Beside him, Alara stood with her glowing violet eyes locked onto the sky, where Orion's ship had disappeared moments ago. "He'll be back," Jake muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Alara nodded. "And he won't be alone." The soft echo of distant thunder rumbled through the canyon, though Jake knew it wasn't thunder. It was the sound of approaching ships. The Empire was closing in. Jake checked his blaster, cursing under his breath. Low on power. Alara glanced at him, concern in her eyes. "We don't have much time." Jake's jaw clenched. "Then we make our stand here." Alara stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Jake, there's something I haven't told you." He looked at her, confusion flickering across his face. "What is it?" She hesitated, then whispered, "If the Empire captures me, they'll use my powers to destroy entire civilizations, including Earth." Jake's eyes widened. "Wait, Earth? Why?" Alara's gaze softened. "Because humans, you inspire rebellion. Your history, your resilience, your hope. The Empire fears that. If I fall into their hands, they'll crush your world to prevent that hope from spreading." Jake's chest tightened. The weight of her words hit him like a punch to the gut. "Then we can't let them take you." Alara looked away. "If it comes to that, you have to kill me, Jake." Jake's voice broke. "No, don't ask me that." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Please, promise me." Jake shook his head, fists clenched. "I can't." Before she could respond, the roar of engines filled the sky. Jake looked up to see several Empire ships descending, their dark forms casting ominous shadows over the canyon. Jake's heart pounded. "They're here." Alara's eyes glowed brighter. "Then let's make sure they regret coming." The first ship landed, and a squad of armored soldiers poured out, weapons raised. Jake ducked behind a rock, firing as they advanced. Alara raised her hands, energy crackling around her. A wave of violet light surged forward, sending the soldiers flying back. But more kept coming. Jake gritted his teeth, firing shot after shot. Suddenly, a familiar voice echoed through a speaker. "Jake, surrender now, and I'll make this easy." Jake's blood boiled. "Orion," he growled. Alara's voice was cold. "He won't stop." Jake peeked out, spotting Orion leading a group of elite soldiers. He aimed his blaster, but Orion shot first, hitting Jake's cover. Jake turned to Alara. "We can't hold them off forever." Alara's eyes narrowed. "Then we don't." Jake blinked. "What?" She took a deep breath. "There's an old power core beneath this canyon. If I channel my energy into it, I can create an explosion strong enough to destroy their fleet." Jake's heart stopped. "And what happens to you?" Alara's voice was calm. "I won't survive." Jake grabbed her arm. "No, we'll find another way." Alara cupped his face gently. "Jake, you gave me hope when I had none. Let me do this." Tears stung Jake's eyes. "Alara, please." She leaned in, pressing her forehead to his. "Thank you for saving me." Before Jake could respond, she pulled away, her eyes glowing like stars. She floated above the ground, energy crackling around her. Jake shouted, "No." But it was too late. Alara shot toward the canyon center, disappearing into the depths. Orion's voice rang out. "What's she doing?" Jake's heart pounded as he realized what she was about to do. He ran after her, but Orion tackled him to the ground. "Where do you think you're going?" Orion sneered. Jake punched him hard, knocking him back. "Saving her." Orion laughed bitterly. "She's already dead." Jake's eyes burned with fury. "Not if I can help it." He sprinted through the canyon, dodging enemy fire. Finally, he found the entrance to the power core. Alara stood in the center, energy surging around her, eyes glowing brighter than ever. "Jake, no," she shouted. "You'll die." Jake ran to her side. "Then we die together." Alara's voice broke. "Why?" Jake whispered. "Because I love you." Tears streamed down her cheeks. She nodded, whispering, "Then let's end this together." Their hands joined, and a brilliant light exploded from them, engulfing the canyon. The Empire ships disintegrated in the blast. Orion barely escaped, his ship damaged but intact. As the dust settled, there was nothing left but silence. A new beginning. Silence. A heavy stillness hung over the canyon, broken only by the faint crackle of dying energy in the air. The once vast fleet of the Zyran Empire was gone, reduced to nothing but dust and scattered debris. The ground itself was scorched, the rocks glowing from the sheer force of the blast. But amidst the ruin, Jake's eyes fluttered open. His body ached, every muscle screaming in pain. He coughed, struggling to sit up. His mind raced as memories flooded back. The blast. Alara, her hand in his, the brilliant light that consumed everything. "Alara," he whispered hoarsely. Panic surged through him as he scanned the desolate canyon. "Alara," he shouted, his voice cracking. Then he saw her. Alara lay motionless a few feet away, her silver hair spread around her like a halo. Her violet skin, usually glowing softly, looked pale, almost fragile. Jake crawled to her side, his hands trembling as he gently shook her. "Alara, wake up," he whispered desperately. "Please, don't leave me." Her eyes remained closed. Jake felt his chest tighten, a painful lump forming in his throat. Tears streamed down his face as he cradled her head in his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I couldn't save you." Suddenly, a faint pulse of energy flickered around her, barely visible. Jake's breath caught. "No, no, you're still here. Come on, princess. Fight." He pressed his forehead to hers, whispering softly, "You said trust gives us hope. I'm trusting you now. Come back to me." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a soft breath. Alara's eyes fluttered open, glowing faintly. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Jake." Jake let out a shaky laugh, relief flooding his face. "Yeah, it's me." She smiled weakly. "We survived." Jake chuckled softly, wiping his tears. "Yeah, somehow, we did." Alara's voice trembled. "I thought I lost you." Jake held her close. "Never. I'm not going anywhere." A faint hum filled the air. Jake looked up to see a small ship descending. "The rebels." "We're not alone anymore," Alara whispered. Jake smiled. "Looks like help finally showed up." The rebel ship landed, and a group of humans and aliens rushed out. A tall human woman with short black hair approached, her expression both cautious and curious. "Jake Reynolds?" she asked. Jake nodded. "Yeah, that's me. I'm Captain Vega. We picked up your signal," she explained. Her eyes softened when she saw Alara. "And this must be the princess." Alara nodded weakly. "Alara Zirin." Captain Vega extended her hand. "Welcome to the rebellion." Jake helped Alara to her feet, and together, they boarded the rebel ship. As the doors closed behind them, Jake let out a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, he felt safe. Inside the ship, Alara sat beside Jake, her head resting on his shoulder. "What happens now?" she whispered. Jake smiled softly. "We fight, together." She looked up at him, a spark of hope in her eyes. Together. As the ship soared through the stars, leaving the ruins of the canyon behind, Jake held Lara close. The fight wasn't over, but they had each other. And for now, that was enough. A new beginning awaited them, full of unknown dangers and endless possibilities. But Jake knew one thing for sure: no matter what came next, humanity would stand tall. Because even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, hope would always shine through.